The war had been dragging on for years. What had started as a border skirmish between the Terran Federation and the Sithrex Dominion quickly spiraled into a full-scale conflict. The Dominion was larger, with countless fleets and resources beyond imagination. Humanity was holding on by a thread, constantly outnumbered, relying on ingenuity and brute resilience to survive each new battle. The Dominion had one goal: to break the Terran Federation entirely. System after system fell under the relentless assault of their war fleets. Human worlds were scorched, outposts destroyed, and the Federation's forces were pushed to the brink. Morale was collapsing, the fleet was in tatters, and many believed the war was already lost. Then, someone remembered the TFS Invictus. The Invictus was an old dreadnought, forgotten by most and left to rot in deep space. It was part of a once proud fleet built during a previous war, now obsolete compared to the sleek, modern ships of the Dominion. The Invictus was mothballed decades ago in a hidden star system, its exact location recorded in ancient military databases that few had ever bothered to check. A desperate plan was formed. With their forces depleted, the Federation needed something, anything, that could turn the tide. If the Invictus was still intact, it could serve as a last weapon, a symbol of defiance. It wouldn't win the war outright, but it could buy time and strike a blow that might slow the Dominion's advance. A salvage crew was dispatched to find it. They jumped into the forgotten system and, after weeks of searching, found the Dreadnought drifting in silence. Its massive hull was battered and covered in dust from decades of neglect. Power was barely functioning, and its systems were ancient relics compared to modern standards. But it was still there, a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. Engineers and technicians worked tirelessly to bring it back online. Its reactors were restarted, weapons systems overhauled, and its hull reinforced. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fast, but the Invictus was powerful. It carried weapons that no modern ship could match: massive railguns capable of firing projectiles at near light speed, energy cannons designed to punch through entire fleets, and an armor system so thick it could withstand the heaviest bombardment. Once it was ready, the Invictus was sent into battle. The Dominion had gathered their largest fleet near the Cryon system, preparing for a final push that would cut the Federation in half. The Invictus jumped into the system alone, facing a fleet of hundreds of Dominion ships. The enemy barely registered it at first, assuming it was just an old relic that would be destroyed in moments. Then the Dreadnought opened fire. Its first volley crippled 3 Dominion cruisers instantly, tearing through their shields and armor like paper. The second volley destroyed a battleship. The Dominion fleet scrambled to respond, but the Invictus kept firing, moving slowly but steadily through the heart of the enemy formation. Its railguns fired relentlessly, each shot a catastrophic blow to the Dominion's forces. The Dominion tried to overwhelm it, but the Invictus was built for this. Its thick armor absorbed hit after hit, and its advanced shielding systems, though ancient, proved far more resilient than anything the Dominion expected. Fighters swarmed it, bombers launched waves of torpedoes, but the Dreadnought kept going, its guns never stopping. For the first time in years, the Dominion fleet began to falter. They had never encountered anything like this, an unstoppable war machine, seemingly impervious to their best efforts. Panic spread through their ranks. Ships began retreating, trying to regroup, but the Invictus pressed the attack, cutting a path straight through the enemy formation. It wasn't just the firepower that mattered. The Invictus became a beacon for the rest of the Federation fleet. Reinforcements arrived, inspired by the sight of the ancient Dreadnought standing alone against impossible odds. Morale surged. What had seemed like another doomed battle turned into a rallying point. The Federation fleet, emboldened by the Invictus, launched a counterattack. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The Dominion fleet, caught off guard and shattered by the relentless assault, was forced into a full retreat. The Invictus had turned the tide. In the days that followed, news of the battle spread across the galaxy. The Invictus became a legend, a forgotten relic that had saved the Federation when all seemed lost. Engineers and historians rushed to study its design, while commanders rethought their strategies. The Dominion, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves on the defensive. The Federation began to rebuild. The war was far from over, but everything had changed. The Dominion knew they were no longer invincible, and the Federation knew they had something more powerful than just weapons. They had hope. The Invictus returned to its hidden star system after the battle. Its job done, it was no longer forgotten. It was remembered as the ship that refused to die, the ship that stood alone and changed the course of history. And while the war continued, one thing was certain: whenever the Federation faced its darkest moments, they would always remember the Dreadnought that had once turned the tide and reminded them what they were fighting for. Humanity was on the brink of extinction. The Galactic Coalition, a union of alien species, had declared war on Earth. Their fleets were vast, their technology superior, and their numbers overwhelming. Humanity's colonies fell one by one, and Earth itself was under siege. The Coalition ships were faster, their weapons more advanced, and their strategies flawless. It seemed like the end was near, but deep in the cold, dark void of space, something was waiting, a forgotten relic of humanity's past, a ship that would change everything. The Dreadnought Eclipse was built during humanity's golden age, a time when Earth's engineers and scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. It was the largest warship ever constructed, a monstrous vessel over 5 kilometers long, armed with enough firepower to level entire planets. Its hull was reinforced with experimental alloys, making it nearly indestructible. Its engines were powered by a revolutionary fusion core, allowing it to travel faster than any ship of its size. But the Eclipse was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of human ambition and ingenuity. When the war began, the Eclipse was nowhere to be found. It had been lost during a test mission decades earlier, vanishing into the uncharted regions of space. Most believed it had been destroyed or abandoned, its crew long dead. But the truth was far more surprising. The Eclipse had been drifting in a remote star system, its systems in hibernation, waiting for someone to wake it. As the Coalition's fleets closed in on Earth, a small group of human scouts stumbled upon the Eclipse. They were searching for resources, anything that could help in the war effort, when their sensors picked up the massive ship. At first, they thought it was an enemy vessel, but as they got closer, they realized what they had found. The Eclipse was intact, its systems still functional. It was a miracle. The scouts boarded the ship and began the long process of reactivating it. The Eclipse's AI, a highly advanced system designed to manage the ship's operations, was still online. It guided the scouts through the process, explaining how to bring the ship back to life. It took days, but eventually, the Eclipse was ready. Its engines roared to life, its weapons systems came online, and its massive hull began to move. The Eclipse's arrival at Earth was nothing short of spectacular. The Coalition's fleets were caught completely off guard. They had never seen anything like it. The Eclipse was a behemoth, a ship that defied all logic and reason. Its weapons tore through the enemy's defenses like paper, its shields absorbing their attacks with ease. The Coalition's ships, once so confident, now scrambled to retreat. But the Eclipse was not just a weapon, it was a symbol. Its arrival gave humanity hope. People who had given up on survival now believed they could win. the eclipse became a rallying point, a reminder of what humanity was capable of. Its presence on the battlefield turned the tide of the war. The coalition, realizing they could not defeat the eclipse, tried to destroy it. They launched everything they had: fighters, bombers, capital ships, even planet-killing weapons. But the eclipse endured. Its hull, reinforced with those experimental alloys, held firm. Its weapons, powered by the revolutionary fusion core, struck back with devastating force. The coalition's fleets were decimated, their forces scattered. In the end, it was the eclipse that saved humanity. Its sheer power and resilience forced the coalition to retreat. The war, which had seemed so hopeless, was now winnable. Humanity began to push back, reclaiming lost colonies and driving the enemy out of their territory. The eclipse led the charge, its massive frame a constant reminder of what humanity could achieve. But the eclipse was not invincible. The war had taken its toll. Its hull was scarred, its systems strained. The fusion core, once so powerful, was beginning to fail. The ship's AI warned that it could not continue indefinitely. The eclipse had done its job, but it could not last forever. In the final battle, the eclipse faced the coalition's last remaining fleet. The enemy had regrouped, determined to destroy the ship that had humiliated them. The battle was fierce, the eclipse fighting with everything it had. Its weapons fired non-stop, its shields absorbing countless attacks. But the damage was too great. The fusion core began to fail, the ship's systems shutting down one by one. As the eclipse's final moments approached, its AI made a decision. It would not let the ship fall into enemy hands. Using the last of its power, the eclipse rammed the coalition's flagship, destroying both vessels in a massive explosion. The enemy fleet, now leaderless, retreated. The war was over. The eclipse was gone, but its legacy lived on. Humanity had won, not just because of the ship's power, but because of what it represented. The eclipse was a reminder of human ingenuity, resilience, and determination. It showed that even in the darkest times, humanity could rise above its challenges. Years later, a monument was built on Earth to honor the eclipse. It stood as a symbol of hope, a reminder of the forgotten Dreadnought that had turned the tide of history. The ship itself was gone, but its impact would never be forgotten. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged victorious, thanks to the eclipse, and as long as that monument stood, the story of the forgotten Dreadnought would live on. In the early years of the war, when Earth was still learning how to fight among the stars, humanity built its first true war machine, a Dreadnought-class ship named Horizon's Edge. It was a marvel of human engineering, designed to be a fortress in space. Thick armor plating, experimental energy shields, and weapon systems that rivaled anything the galaxy had seen before made it the pride of Earth's fledgling fleet. It was built not just to fight but to endure, a symbol of humanity's determination to survive and thrive in a hostile galaxy. But things didn't go as planned. The Horizon's Edge was deployed in one of the earliest battles between humanity and an alien empire called the Vakari. The Vakari were ruthless, their ships sleek and fast, with weapons that could tear through most human vessels in seconds. Humanity had underestimated them. The battle turned into a massacre, and the Horizon's Edge was lost in the chaos, presumed destroyed along with the rest of the fleet. No wreckage was ever recovered. Years passed. The war grew worse. The Vakari pushed deeper into human territory, capturing colony after colony. Earth was barely holding on. Its fleet outnumbered and outgunned. Desperation became the norm. Every battle was a gamble, every loss a step closer to extinction. Humanity needed something, anything, that could shift the balance. Then came the signal. It was faint, almost buried beneath the static of deep space. An old emergency beacon, its frequency matching the horizon's edge. The coordinates pointed to a remote system far beyond the front lines, a place no one had reason to visit. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch. The ship had been lost for nearly a decade. How could it still be transmitting? But desperation makes people listen to even the faintest hope. A small reconnaissance team was sent to investigate. What they found would change everything. The horizon's edge was still there, drifting silently in the void. Its hull was scarred and battered, evidence of the brutal battle it had survived. But it was intact. Miraculously, the ship's systems were still operational. Though barely, it had been running on emergency power for years. Its crew long gone, the ship abandoned and forgotten. Yet it remained, waiting in the darkness. More remarkable than its survival was what it carried. The Horizon's Edge had been one of the first ships to test Earth's prototype energy weapons, technology far more advanced than anything humanity had been using in the war since its loss. On board were not just the weapons themselves, but detailed schematics, data logs, and blueprints that could revolutionize human warfare. News of the discovery spread quickly through Earth's military. The ship was towed back to a secure facility, where engineers and scientists swarmed over it. Every piece of technology was analyzed, studied, and replicated. The energy weapons were integrated into new warship designs, and within months, Earth's fleet was armed with weapons that could punch through Vakari defenses with ease. The next battle was different. Humanity, armed with the knowledge recovered from the Horizon's Edge, launched a counteroffensive. The Vakari, used to fighting weaker ships with conventional weapons, were caught off guard. Human ships now carried weapons that could disable their shields in seconds, tearing through their fleets with brutal efficiency. For the first time in the war, the Vakari were forced to retreat. One victory led to another. What had once been a war of survival turned into a war of reclamation. Humanity pushed back, retaking lost colonies and destroying Vakari strongholds. The tide had turned, and it all traced back to the Horizon's Edge. But the ship's story didn't end with its rediscovery. It was rebuilt and returned to service, once again leading the charge in humanity's fight for survival. Though scarred and weathered, it became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could still be found. The Horizon's Edge fought in every major battle of the final years of the war, earning a reputation as an unbreakable force. By the time the war ended, humanity stood victorious. The Vakari, once so confident in their superiority, had been utterly defeated. Their empire collapsed, leaving Earth and its allies as the dominant powers in the galaxy. The Horizon's Edge was retired with honors, placed in orbit around Earth as a monument to those who had fought and fallen. Its hull, still bearing the scars of its long journey, became a symbol for future generations, a testament to human ingenuity, persistence, and the will to survive against impossible odds. It stood there for decades, a silent guardian watching over the planet it had once helped save. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see it, to learn its story, and to understand how one forgotten ship had changed the course of history. In the end, it wasn't just a dreadnought. It was proof that sometimes, the key to victory lies not in overwhelming strength but in the ability to endure, adapt, and seize the smallest chance when it comes. And for humanity, the Horizon's Edge had been that chance, a forgotten relic that turned the tide of history. In the early years of humanity's expansion into space, war had become an ever-present reality. As colonies grew across distant systems, conflicts followed. Some were territorial disputes, while others were battles for survival against hostile alien empires. Among these, none were more feared than the Jaran Empire, an ancient race with unmatched military strength and centuries of conquest behind them. Humanity's navy, though determined, was still young. Its ships were smaller, its tactics untested. For every victory, there were losses that cut deep into the fleet's strength. Morale was crumbling, and many believed it was only a matter of time before the Zarans wiped out the outer colonies and pushed toward Earth itself. But in one forgotten corner of human space, buried in a scrap field orbiting a dead moon, lay something the galaxy had long overlooked: the Resolute. It had once been humanity's pride, a massive dreadnought, built during the early colonial wars, armed with experimental weapons and the thickest armor ever constructed. It was designed to be unstoppable, but during its first deployment, something had gone wrong. An engine failure left it stranded far from help, forcing the crew to abandon ship. By the time salvage teams arrived years later, its systems were beyond repair. Newer ships had replaced it, and the Resolute was left to drift, forgotten and buried under decades of space junk. The war with the Zarans had reached its breaking point when someone remembered the Resolute. Desperate for anything that could help, the Admiralty sent a small team of engineers to investigate. What they found shocked them. Despite decades of neglect, the Resolute's structure was intact. Its thick armor had protected it from the elements, and many of its internal systems were salvageable. There was no time for a full restoration. The ship's propulsion system was rebuilt just enough to make it operational, and its weapons, primitive by modern standards, were brought back online. It wasn't perfect, but it was ready to fight. Humanity needed a symbol of strength, and the Resolute, even in its battered state, could become just that. The timing couldn't have been worse, or more perfect. A massive Jaran fleet had been detected heading for the colony of Epsilon Prime, the last major human stronghold before Earth itself. If Epsilon Prime fell, there would be nothing left to stop the enemy's advance. The Resolute, escorted by a handful of smaller ships, was thrown into battle. Few believed it could make a difference. The Jaran fleet was vast, its ships bristling with advanced weaponry. The Resolute was a relic, a ghost from a forgotten war, and many thought it would be destroyed before it even reached firing range. But the Resolute was more than a relic, it was a fortress. As the battle began, it pushed straight into the heart of the Jaran fleet, its thick armor absorbing hit after hit. Modern ships would have crumbled under such firepower, but the Resolute held its ground. It was slow and cumbersome, but unstoppable, plowing through enemy formations like a battering ram. Its main weapon, an ancient railgun the size of a skyscraper, fired with devastating effect. Each shot tore through multiple enemy ships, leaving trails of destruction in its wake. Jaran cruisers scrambled to stop it, pouring everything they had into the Dreadnought's hull, but the ship's armor shrugged off most of the damage. The smaller human ships rallied around the Resolute, using it as cover while launching counterattacks. What had begun as a hopeless last stand quickly turned into something else, a chance. The Zarans, thrown off balance by the Resolute's relentless advance, began to falter. For the first time, the tide of battle shifted. The battle raged for hours. The Resolute's systems groaned under the strain, fires breaking out across its decks as damage piled up. Its crew worked tirelessly to keep it moving, patching systems on the fly and rerouting power from non-essential sections. They knew the ship wouldn't last forever, but they didn't need it to. They just needed it to hold the line. And it did. As the Jaran fleet began to collapse, the remaining human ships pressed the attack. One by one, the enemy vessels were destroyed or forced to retreat. By the time the battle ended, the once mighty Jaran armada was reduced to wreckage drifting in orbit. Epsilon Prime was safe. The Resolute, battered and barely functional, became a legend overnight. Its return had turned the tide of not just the battle, but the entire war. Humanity, inspired by its victory, launched a renewed offensive, pushing the Zaren's back system by system. The Dreadnought itself was towed back to Earth, where it was restored, not as a warship, but as a monument to human resilience and the power of forgotten strength. Generations later, the Resolute still stands in orbit above Earth, a silent guardian and a reminder that even the most forgotten and discarded things can change the course of history. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment of desperation, and the right spark, to turn the tide.